All right, hi everyone and welcome. So my name is Marianne Kong, and I'm very pleased to be presenting this morning's parallel session on designing good governance and the city. So just a brief introduction to myself. So I have a background in EU environmental policy and have worked for several years with policymakers at the European Commission, notably in terms of developing, evaluating, implementing a wide range of different environmental policies in areas from resource and material efficiency, end of life and waste management, and most recently on lots of circular economy related issues, particularly in relation to how to further encourage the uptake of circular design principles in buildings. So I'm very, very happy to be hosting today's session. As a reminder, so the focus or the overall objective of today's session is on how different cities around the world have addressed and developed different infrastructures in their urban environments and cities to ensure that these cities remain resilient in the face of natural disasters, global pandemics, other social and environmental challenges, to ensure that the health and well-being of their citizens are maintained. And so for that, I am very honored to be introducing you to our three very special panelists that will be presenting their very fascinating and relevant work in the area. Just a reminder, so we'll go through all the presentations first. So there's going to be 3 of them, followed by a short question and answer session, similar to how this morning's presentations were organized. So we'll start with a presentation by Catharine Thompson from the University of Edinburgh, and she will talk about the value of green spaces for green cities, or for good cities, and why it's important and essential to preserve green spaces in relation to human health and well-being. And then we'll follow with Marten Bukolow, sorry for name pronunciation, and Sylvia Breukers from DuneWorks, who will then share their knowledge on possible solutions. So on the ground practical solutions in terms of better engaging and participating citizens and creating and maintaining the green spaces in their communities. And then we will end with Raphaël Languillon from the University of Geneva, who will present some best practices and lessons learned from the specific examples of Tokyo and Singapore. So I'm very excited to be now leaving the floor to them. I think maybe we can just do a short round of introductions so that they can briefly introduce themselves, and then we can go straight into the presentations.
Shall I start by introducing myself? Good morning, everyone. I'm Catharine Ward Thompson. I'm a professor of landscape architecture at the University of Edinburgh. So I have a design background professionally, but I also direct Open Space Research Centre, which focuses on inclusive access to outdoor environments. So access to the outdoors and to good quality open space for all people. Recently, my research has particularly focused on links between landscape and health and well-being. And I was involved in co-writing a report recently for the World Health Organization European region, looking at links between urban green space and human health. Thank you.
I'll go ahead then. My name is Marten Bukolow. I am trained as an anthropologist. I've worked mostly on issues of citizenship earlier for my PhD in Beirut, but later I shifted to studies of the energy transition, in particular the possibilities of taking up a responsibility or caring for one's community or the environment through new energy platforms that kind of deal with decentralized energy flows. And that is how I also got to work at DuneWorks, where I still work quite a bit on these kind of new energy platforms that try to manage the flows of our energy and what that means for end users or citizens.
Et bonjour à tous, bonjour à toutes. Je profite du fait qu'il y ait une traduction simultanée pour parler en français, ce qui est assez rare dans un colloque international. Donc, je remercie vraiment les organisateurs et les organisatrices pour cette opportunité. Donc, je suis Raphaël Languillon, je suis un enseignant et un chercheur de l'Université de Genève, du département de géographie et de la faculté des sciences de la société. Ce qui m'intéresse essentiellement dans mes travaux, de façon très générale, c'est les relations entre la transformation des régimes capitalistiques, la transformation des dynamiques de gouvernance et la traduction sur les processus d'urbanisation et les formes urbaines. Et pour cette présentation, je vais essayer de donner quelques éléments de réflexion à partir de 2 cas d'études, la ville mature à Tokyo et puis la Smart City à Singapour, pour voir comment s'y déploient les logiques de biopolitique et d'aménagement urbain et de voir quels sont les enseignements que l'on pourrait trouver pour les métropoles européennes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sylvia Breukers. I'm a colleague of Marten, Bukolow. So like Marten, I work on various aspects, social and societal dimensions of the energy transition, where we look at how energy citizenship is shaped through opportunities to participate in the energy transition for various citizens and end users. But apart from that, we also have done work in a project on nature-based solutions over the past couple of years. And there we also have been actively involved in considering how people that live in the neighborhoods for which these nature-based solutions are planned, of course, they can be on different scales, how they can be best engaged in these processes from the moment of ideation until the maintenance. So that is what we will be telling something about today.
Great, thank you very much, everyone. So I guess since we don't have so much time, I suggest we go straight into the presentations. I'll leave it to you, Catharine.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen and go to the first slide, which I hope you can see there. So my focus is on health, green space and inclusive landscapes, the salutogenic city. Salutogenic meaning health supporting. So the idea of a city environment that supports good health. And one of the things to just underline in the context of our wonderful opening presentations, thinking globally about sustainable development goals, is that the World Health Organization believes that these sustainable development goals are one of the best ways to achieve better health globally as well. So sustainability and health are inextricably entwined, as we know, but really they just want to underline the importance of linking good health and well-being to sustainable cities and communities. And just one example of a goal that shows what this means in practice, goal 11.7, by 2030, provide universal access to safe, inclusive and accessible green and public spaces, in particular for women and children, older persons and persons with disabilities. Now, why does this matter? Why does the World Health Organization think this Sustainable Development Goal about urban green space is so important? That's really the focus of the rest of my brief presentation. And there are many different models that different disciplines use. What's interesting to me as an environmental designer is that this image, which has people at the centre and conventional medical treatment of health, has focused on the individual and delivering medical treatment to the individual, but we understand now in a socio-ecological approach that everything matters to the health of the individual, a whole range of things, including climate stability, that outer circle of the global ecosystem that terrifyingly we now realise we are able to modify. But those blue inner 3 circles from the outside going in, natural environment, built environment, and the activities that they afford are very important parts of the environment that we can modify for good or ill. So that's what I'm interested in. And there is increasing recognition in public health circles that environmental conceptualizations of public health, ecological public health, is absolutely what we need to focus on if we are to continue to have any hope of having healthy individuals, human health, in the 21st century. We cannot ignore the environment. And perhaps a more selfish approach, but nonetheless relevant one, that environmental interventions that support good health will save the public health service and the medical service in particular for our citizens money. If we can prevent people getting ill in the first place, clearly that's better. We all understand that in theory. Making a difference in practice is the challenge. And of course, this isn't new. Those of you who are interested in landscape design, environmental design, will know very well that, for example, the public parks movement that developed in Europe in the 18th and 19th century was very much focused on enhancing the health of the workers living in very dense urban conditions, particularly after the Industrial Revolution. And the idea of parks as the lungs of the city, healthy places that would restore workers working in polluted environments to better health is an old one. And we see in North America as well, Frederick Law Olmsted, the landscape architect working with an English architect, Calvert Vaux. Very interestingly, in this quote with an image from Central Park that they designed, talks about the benefits to mental health of engagement with a pleasing rural scenery, as he called it, a green and naturalistic environment. And he talks about a harmful effect, first on a man's entire mental and nervous system, and ultimately on his entire constitutional organisation. So it's interesting that contemporary medical science actually echoes very well this 19th century view of the damage that urban contemporary living can do to our mental well-being and the restorative value of parks and green and natural space. So contemporary science has shown, and I'm sure many if not all of you are aware of this, that green and blue space, that's shorthand for green natural environments that include beaches, coastlines, rivers, canals, have shown internationally that having green space near where you live, other things being equal, will reduce your mortality rate. We all know that income level is the best predictor of your health. Tragically, even in developed Western world, the richer you are, the more likely you are to live longer and have better health. But what we find is that those things being equal, more green space near where you live is associated with longevity. And really importantly, green space is also equigenic. Particularly for the most deprived populations, we see a difference in disease between those who have greater green space near where they live and those who have less green space. So it reduces that difference in health that we see based on socioeconomic circumstance. And just to remind you of the mechanisms that we think, that we're still undertaking a lot of research on this, but what are the mechanisms behind this link between green space, shorthand for green-blue space, and that wider sort of range of environments? Well, physical activity. Most of us are more active outdoors than indoors, from older people to children through adulthood. So physical activity, we know, is good for our health, it's good for our cardiovascular health, but we also know that physical activity can help our mood and reduce stress. So there may be multiple benefits from that physical activity there. Social engagement. We've noticed, particularly under COVID and lockdown, that it can be very difficult to have social engagement with other people that's not mediated by electronics and the computer. But there is a huge benefit in being outdoors in public spaces where there may be informal contact with other people, maybe not physical contact, but a smile across the street or in a park to a neighbour. These can be very important loose contacts, loose connections that are social ties for people living on their own in particular, which many of our older citizens are. And we know that social isolation, particularly in old age, is an independent risk factor, so very important. Attention restoration, I haven't got time to go into the details of the theories behind this, but happy to answer questions or give references afterwards. Rachel and Stephen Kaplan led on the concept that of attention restoration. We know that working hard, hunched over a computer, but also dealing with busy urban life, crossing a busy urban street, negotiating the way that our crowded cities are, requires directed attention, and that becomes exhausted. And one of the best environments for restoring attention is a green or natural environment that has what's been called soft fascination. It engages our attention effortlessly. The flickering of light through the leaves of trees, the sound of birdsong, or the pattern of waves on the shore engage us, but we don't have to work at it. And that's very good for restoring our attention so we can then direct it again to the task in hand. Physiological responses are also noted, and there's a lot of very interesting new science involved in this, looking at independent mechanisms, psychoneuroendocrine mechanisms, immune functioning, parasympathetic nerve activity. That's the rest and digest activity that's the opposite of fight or flight mode. So when we need to rest, digest, relax, so that when we need to be on the alert again, when the adrenaline is flowing, we have the energy to do that. And these biological pathways are very important because we know there may be psychological benefits because we like looking at attractive landscapes. There may be physical benefits, but some of these physiological pathways have illustrated to us that chronic stress, for example, leads to wear and tear on the body. So mental ill health can cause physical ill health. And if green space reduces or buffers what's called this allostatic load, this stress, it can benefit physical as well as mental health. And I've been involved in some research that showed that chronic stress patterns in a deprived urban population could be predicted by the amount of cortisol in the saliva, which is an indication of stress. So we were actually quite surprised to get this result. We weren't necessarily expecting it. But we found that for deprived urban populations and people struggling to cope on their income, so socioeconomically deprived, people looking for work, they had healthier cortisol patterns if they had more green space near where they lived. And we also found links with social well-being and better access to green space, and this was linked to a sense of place belonging. So we think there is a complex interaction of things going on here where good local green space helps you psychologically to feel you belong to that place, but also it reduces stress. And research, not research that I've been involved with, but research that is very interesting and exciting recently has started to show, for example, birth outcomes can be predicted by the quality and the access to green space around where people live. Healthy birth weight, gestational development at birth of babies, and this is particularly true for deprived populations. So these environmental differences make more difference to the deprived communities where people perhaps have less resource to be able to buy themselves out of the situation they find themselves in, less ability to travel distances to get to high quality spaces. And the kind of messages that we try to get across, how are we going to persuade our politicians to, our local authorities to act on this? These are the kinds of messages we produce from our research to try and boil it down to something that is easy to understand. This is based on research we did with a lot of older participants, aged 60 and over. Those who lived within 10 minutes walk of a local open space were twice as likely to achieve the healthy levels of walking that are recommended at least 2.5 hours a week compared with those whose local open space was further away than a 10-minute walk. It's a very simple answer, but the message comes across very clearly. And similarly, those people who had a close local open space were more than twice as likely to be satisfied with life. So boiling down complex research into simple messages is an important part of engaging with the wider society, and particularly with policymakers and people who are decision makers in public life. A recent project that I've been involved with, Mobility, Mood and Place, explores how places can be designed collaboratively to make mobility easy and meaningful for older people. We have a lot of interesting results. I haven't got time to share them all with you, but really, and this speaks to some of our subsequent speakers' interests, we've worked with older participants and with our master's students, so the next generation of architecture and landscape architecture practitioners, to understand what are the important things for the local environment that older people want, and what are their aspirations, what would they like to see. And we've worked in London, a site of a deprived community near where the Olympics Park was in 2012. We've worked in remote rural areas in Orkney. We've worked in Manchester and Edinburgh. And listening to older people and encouraging them to feel that they can be co-designers in envisioning new projects, we've identified some aspects that are very important as we age: access for all, access to nature, access to others, access to light. And this is just one example of a student design project solution, which is a contemporary version of a very ancient European tradition, the peristyle, where you have a covered but threshold between the indoors and the outdoors. You can see what's going on in the world outside. You can go out into a covered space that is outdoors, but you're not vulnerable to rain or wind or the weather or the sun. You can choose how much you engage or not. You can retreat from that but still watch the world go by, or you can be out and fully in society in that outdoor space. And just one little example of a good threshold that supports older people into very old age in feeling engaged with the outdoors and being able to use it effectively. One other piece of research that we've engaged with looks at the effect of environments where we live over the life course. This is very innovative. We've recently published some work on this, looking, for example, at access to green space through access to public parks, as has been mapped for a cohort of people that we know about who were born in 1936. We know where they lived and what access they had in childhood, adulthood and old age. We find we can predict a lesser slope of cognitive aging, age 70 plus, from childhood access, better childhood access to green space. And we've also looked at mental health in older age with this cohort of people who are now in their 80s, and we see an influence over the life course on anxiety and depression for the most socially disadvantaged neighbourhoods only, but green space during childhood makes a difference to anxiety and depression in older age for these people. Every decade of life near more green space makes a difference in older age. So I'm going to wrap up with a summary that is something I put together. I was asked when I did this work for the World Health Organization to talk to the ministerial advisors of all the European region of WHO, which is 53 countries, about the importance. I had 10 minutes to say what's important about green space that they should care about for health. So this is a shorthand, but trying to summarise what's important. What types of green space does the city need? It needs to be very nearby, ideally visible from most places where we spend our days. It's important for mood, stress relief, mental restoration. We need access to private, semi-private or public areas at a local scale. We need places where children can play, for schools. We need places where older people can feel comfortable, for outdoor living, for gardening. There are multiple different activities that people want to engage with that a good, close, safe, accessible outdoor environment can support. And we need these for our own development and health. We need green infrastructure networks through our cities that makes active transport not just possible, but enjoyable, attractive, away from pollutants, and usable to get to all parts of the city. And of course, we need our larger parks, natural areas, readily accessible, not just for the rich with cars, but for everyone. We need sports pitches, we need places for active recreation, big family gatherings, but also for environmental education, nature study, biodiversity. So we need a full ecology of spaces to support people. Where do we need it? Close to where we live, where we work, where we spend our days. Lots of evidence shows that any outdoor space that is more than 5 to 10 minutes walk away is not going to be used several times a week. So if we really want this to benefit all of our citizens, particularly those who need it most, the socioeconomically deprived, then it needs to be very nearby. I'll finish there. You can see I have a presentation that is available on the conference website, and just to flag up a couple of reports that I was involved with for the WHO European region, you can get online. There's a lot of useful references there too, as well as on my own open space website. Thank you, and I'll finish there.
Thank you very much, Catherine. That was super interesting.
I'm just trying to see if I can unshare, or have I unshared? Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll now pass it on to Marten and Sylvia. See if you can, there we go.
I'm sharing my screen, I hope.
Yep.
I'll make it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll make it a large screen. Is it working like this?
We're in presenter mode.
Good. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Or not?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. Because Marten, you will start, right?
Yes, I will. And you can hear me fine? I had some issues with the audio earlier, but now it's fine, Sylvia?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay, good. All right. So last year I spoke at this conference as well, and I spoke about smart cities. I reviewed the evidence about whether smart cities were also sustainable cities. And I found that they were not. Baked into smart city programs were innovation and new economic opportunities, and sustainability came as a wishful afterthought. For largely the same reasons, researchers found that smart city initiatives weren't doing very well on inclusivity either. Innovation and creating new economic opportunities turned out to happen mostly with people and neighborhoods with capital. Therefore, I ended my talk with a plea for the Green Deal city. That is, for a paradigm of urban development and improvement that is strongly informed by environmental justice. That means that sustainability measures it proposes should not only have a proven environmental track record, but they also need to benefit the most vulnerable, especially. So prioritizing public transport or building affordable energy efficient housing will do that trick. But it's also a paradigm that wants to devolve power, meaning ownership and political participation, to communities wherever possible. It's good to have this as your starting point if you want to think about creating the conditions for the good city. Participation in public life was key to the good life for Aristotle, an activity through which to cultivate virtue and to grow as a person. Enabling and supporting citizens in developing their capacities for democratic deliberation therefore fits in a politics of the good life. Recognition is an important facet of that. Recognizing someone as an interlocutor and a collaborator can prove a powerful validation of one's autonomy and of one's membership of the political community. Now, so far, so nice theory. Things get tricky when you try and put this into practice. So to examine how this could be done, we leave the Green Deal city and take the highway to the plain green city, of which Catharine has just sung her praises. How do you actually make them happen? Well, we'll lift a tip of an actually rather heavy and intricately woven veil by reviewing not a philosophy nor a political program, but a methodology that is informed by the same aforementioned environmental justice principles, and which we have evocatively named with a Dutch sense for poetry, the step-by-step guide for nature-based solutions. Now, my colleague Sylvia has all the details for you, so I will gladly hand over the floor to her.
Well, thank you, Marten, and thank you all for having us here today. Catharine, that was a very interesting and inspiring presentation with lots of evidence underlying the importance of green spaces for citizens in cities. We see now in these COVID times, we see a flight to the countryside. So the people who can afford it, they choose to move into more quiet and green spaces and work from home. But nevertheless, I hope that for those urban planners who stay within the city, your story will, especially in these times when we all try to go outside and go for a walk and find that we have to go quite far sometimes to find these nice green spaces, that they are inspired also by your stories, which are not just stories, but quite hard evidence. Because we do need more green spaces in cities, which has become more clear than ever in these COVID times when we're all going for walks, even those people who didn't previously. But today, Marten gave you a very nice conceptual introduction, and I try to continue in a bit different way, because for me, the starting point is a project that we've been working on for quite a while. And part of that project, because it's a multidisciplinary project, and part of that project is the step-by-step guide, which contains this methodology. But first, I would like to give you a brief overview of this project called Nature for Cities. It's a project that that has developed ideas for nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions, that's a term that can be defined as follows. Nature-based solutions are actions that are inspired or exported by nature to simultaneously address urban challenges regarding climate change, availability of resources, environmental quality, socio-economic issues at different and interconnected scales. Nature-based solutions can be diverse, and they can range from urban forest to citywide green infrastructure networks, greening gardens, composting and renaturing river banks, green playgrounds, and so forth. So a key aspect of a nature-based solution is that it provides multiple benefits, not just strict ecological benefits, but also social and socio-economical. It can have multiple types of designs. It can address multiple scales, and it's about green solutions, so it's about dynamic solutions that need to be adaptable to context. Oh, I'm sorry, we should have moved on already. So this is where we are. The Nature for Cities project tries in a holistic way to address these various challenges. And some background about the project very briefly. It was a 4-year horizon project. It's nearing its end. 28 partners were involved from across Europe and Turkey. And among these partners, we had 4 pilot cities, if you will. Çankaya in Turkey, Alcalá de Henares in Spain, Milan, Italy, and Szeged in Hungary. And in these cities, planners from these cities collaborated with us in the project. We've done research, user research as well in these cities in existing green areas that were planned to be, restored, to be rebuilt, and to be improved into nature-based solutions. Where we are now at, well, I'm just going back to the previous slide because these pictures give us a slight idea of the variety of nature-based solutions, also the variety of the scales at which they can be considered. And within the Nature for Cities project, we've collected a huge database of examples and case studies that also serve as inspiration for planners to consider what would be useful in the context that they work in. So the planning and implementation then of nature-based solutions can be quite tricky. It can be quite challenges. There are solutions that intervene in highly complex socio-ecological systems, but they also require the bundling of various types of expertise between different sectors and disciplines, but also in a transdisciplinary manner when you try to engage those that are expert about the local environment, like citizens, people that represent neighborhood organizations, etc. So the nature-based project, it resulted in various tools and methods. We built a knowledge repository, nature-based solutions databases, and various assessment tools. And on the website, there's a so-called Nature for Cities platform, and there you can easily click on some of these tools where you can find an explanation and also see the extent to which they may be suitable for a context that you're working in. And I'm saying you all the time, assuming that there's also people attending this conference or participating at this webinar that are actually interested in planning and policy making. So the platform offers tools for policymakers, planners, but also urban professionals and civil society actors. And they provide input for the various phases of nature-based solutions development, from the first ideation phase until the maintenance. What we also did is make a handbook. It's a very small handbook actually, and it doesn't, what it does is, because the thinking about planning and implementation of nature-based solutions is quite challenging. It's also a term that many planners are not yet familiar with. We've developed a lot of tools, but where to start? So this handbook presents some of the work done for the Nature for Cities project, and it's particularly suited for those working in the public domain on greening of infrastructure, and who want to get an idea of tools that we developed to enable inclusive and focused planning for nature-based solutions. So it can serve as a sort of an introduction. And here you see the table of contents, basically. And what we will now go into a bit more is this step-by-step guide that Marten mentioned before. It's a tool that that we developed. My colleague Yvette Jeuker did a lot of work on this as well. So basically, it's a guide that's based on ideas around placemaking and environmental justice. And the steps that are proposed in this guide, they should help to create a framework for dialogue, negotiation and learning, in which diverse perspectives and diverse types of knowledge are acknowledged and recognized, whereby there's room to discuss the distribution of costs, risks, and benefits, and whereby an effort is done to enable and support all participants in the process to express their views and participate. Or, in other words, this is what the environmental justice framework is all about. It's about recognition of difference. It's about procedural justice. It's about distributive justice, capabilities, enabling others to participate, that is, and it's about responsibility. Not only taking responsibility, but also allowing others to adopt responsibility for instance, the maintenance of a nature-based solution. And of course, in principle, no one objects to these environmental justice norms, but in practice, it's difficult to keep them in mind. And this planning guide helps helps a project team, if you will, to keep these in mind and to keep these central in the process. This step-by-step guide is not very extensive. It's like 37 pages long, and it's quite practically and it's quite pragmatic in its approach. So for each step, it explains why is this step important, what does it mean, how can you go about it, are there sub-steps, what do they entail and why are they important, what sort of tools could you use, and then sometimes reference is made to other tools that have been developed in the Nature for Cities project. And there's also attention to whom is best suited to address the issue, with whom and when. And so in that way, it's an approach that helps you to plan in a flexible and adaptive manner. I'm trying now to summarize because I'm looking at the time. I wanted to go through all the 6 steps, but I don't think that time-wise that is a good idea. So the steps are, I just read them aloud. Internal alignment, that's about your internal organization and making sure that you're aligned in terms of what the expectations are, what your ideas about the problems and the solutions, how you define success, but also how you envisage to organize the participation and the engagement of various stakeholders, including citizens. Being clear about the goal of the participation is very important to make sure that during the process you can also communicate this clearly, and that it's also so that it's also clear to those that participate in the project what is going to be done with their inputs. So internally with your organization, that needs to be addressed properly. The other steps, they are about contextualizing the problem together with local stakeholders, see what problem definitions are brought forward. It's about engaging stakeholders, finding common ground, defining some first ideas about the NBS and testing this with stakeholders, in inviting them to come forward with their ideas. But also when you implement and arrive at the phase of the maintenance of the nature-based solution, which is a very important phase, of course, because then it starts, because the maintenance of green space is quite a challenge. There also it's very important to continue the engagement with local stakeholders and citizens. I'll leave it at this. I see we have passed 15 minutes, but the nice thing to mention perhaps is this approach allows for negotiation and learning with diverse perspectives and types of knowledge. It's part of an iterative process, of course. It allows for flexibility along the process regarding expectations, views and considerations, what's possible, but also what fits with a place and with the users of that place. And it allows for learning along the way. And I said before that we also have the databases full of inspiring cases. And one of them is nice to mention. It's a case study in the Netherlands. Well, we did a case study a few years ago, but a few weeks ago, I talked with one of the initiator of this project, and he told me about the success that this approach has reached over the past couple of years. It's called Operation Brick Breaker. The idea is very simple. You take a brick out of the pavement and put a plant instead. Well, it's a bit less easy than that, but the idea is it's a concept for helping people in neighborhoods to green their own neighborhoods. And when there is a slight bit of interest in that, then the municipality, which is part of this initiative, offers help, offers some advice. And invites companies located in the municipality to also come forward with some support. For instance, the garden centers, they often come forward with they provide plants or they provide soil, but the initiative remains with the neighborhood. The scale, the type of activities is also something that people themselves decide on. So it's a very flexible concept. It's on a very local scale, but it's replicable. And it started with 5 municipalities, as you can see, and now 150 municipalities in the Netherlands are engaged with this. And it can be called quite a success in that sense. So I think this is a very inspiring example. And I think also in these difficult COVID times, this also is an example of activities that are likely to be continued because it's outdoors and people are able to maintain some distance. And we see it. I see it in my neighborhood. I live in Amsterdam. That the number of like very small gardens in the paved areas in the neighborhood is increasing over the last couple of years. I wanted to leave it at this. If you go to our website, you will find very interesting tools. If you're a city planner, also tools that use GIS that help you to also contextualize ideas that you may have for your city to your specific context. You can find examples of types of nature-based solutions. You can find also tools that help you to also build a financial case, business models, etc. Well, much more to tell, but I'll leave it at this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you, Marten and Sylvia. It was very interesting to see that there are being practical tools that can be put into place in all different types of cities, and that I think a key challenge that we probably all agree on is the very local specificities of cities, and that not any city is the same. So being able to measure and acknowledge and identify the key issues that are specific to local areas and cities are a key essential step in this process. And with that, I think it's a good transition to Raphaël, who will give us some practical real life examples of how cities in Asia, so Tokyo and Singapore, are trying to address these urban challenges in the context of health and well-being. So I will mute myself now.
Bonjour à tous et à toutes, rebonjour. Je pense que vous m'entendez bien. Donc, je suis donc très heureux de présenter ce travail sur ces réflexions sur une biopolitique asiatique de villes denses et vertes, avec un questionnement sur les dilemmes d'un aménagement post-Covid. Alors, quand on pense à la biopolitique et aux travaux de Foucault, évidemment, on peut définir la biopolitique comme, de façon très générale, la gestion des populations par les gouvernements, et en particulier la gouvernance et la gouvernementalité d'une notion nouvelle qui est la santé publique, enfin nouvelle plus tellement maintenant, qui est la santé publique qui suppose, qui vise un contrôle collectif des populations et une mise en discipline des comportements individuels. Donc il y a toujours ces deux aspects du collectif et de l'individuel dans la biopolitique. Et cette biopolitique, elle considère les épidémies et les enjeux sanitaires comme des phénomènes biosociaux. Biosociaux, c'est-à-dire qu'un virus n'est pas, une épidémie plutôt n'est pas que le fait d'un virus, c'est aussi le fait de modalités de diffusion de ce virus, et ces modalités de diffusion, elles sont éminemment sociales, éventuellement politiques. Par exemple, si l'on pense à un taux de mortalité lié à une épidémie, en l'occurrence la Covid-19, ce taux de mortalité repose sur plusieurs facteurs qui sont extrêmement complexes. D'une part, évidemment, la quantification Et cette quantification des décès, elle est plus politique que mathématique. Et puis, le taux de mortalité dépend également de la dangerosité et de la virulence du virus, qui sont des caractéristiques propres au virus, mais également la qualité du système de soins des régimes et des sociétés considérées, l'état de la population affectée, est-ce qu'elle est plutôt en bonne santé, est-ce qu'elle est plutôt vieillissante, etc. Et là, avec la Covid-19, on a évidemment le phénomène des papy-boomers, c'est-à-dire les anciens baby-boomers entrés en âge, en troisième âge, dans le troisième âge, qui accroissent les facteurs de vulnérabilité. Et puis, il y a évidemment dans ces taux de mortalité toute la culture des interactions sociales et la qualité de l'environnement qui permet ces interactions sociales, et ces caractéristiques qui sont propres à l'urbain changent en fonction de chaque territoire et de chaque ville considérée. Donc évidemment, c'est en tant que phénomène biosocial que les épidémies intéressent l'aménagement urbain, ses enjeux et ses arbitrages. Et en particulier, j'aimerais insister sur deux arbitrages, celui de la densification de la ville, qui est une injonction héritée récemment de la durabilité, et puis celui de son aération, de son verdissement, qui peuvent être parfois des arbitrages qui entrent en opposition. La question, évidemment, dans un contexte post-Covid, c'est de savoir est-ce que cette biopolitique de l'aménagement urbain est remise en question par cette pandémie. Dans quelle mesure est-ce que la pandémie de la Covid-19 déjoue les dispositifs spatiaux mis en place par 100 ans, un siècle et demi de biopolitique dans les pays européens. Et je propose de répondre à cette question en faisant un détour par certaines villes asiatiques. Alors, dans un premier temps, cette biopolitique européenne a été très proche également d'une économie politique de l'urbain à travers l'hygiénisme. L'hygiénisme, c'est ce qui permet de faire le lien entre la biopolitique et l'économie politique de l'aménagement urbain. Avec, alors à gauche, c'est Paris, c'est les travaux du baron Haussmann qui ont eu pour objectif des objectifs hygiénistes, d'aération, de verdissement, de circulation de l'air. Dans le centre de Paris, qui était une capitale un peu étouffante, dans laquelle la mauvaise circulation des eaux potables, eaux usées, de l'air, etc., et la proximité des habitants, l'insalubrité des habitations faisait se multiplier les pandémies, dont par exemple le choléra. Et ce geste architectural et urbanistique hygiéniste était également proche de considérations plus économiques, d'économie politique, puisque lorsque le baron Haussmann est arrivé, a été appelé par Napoléon III au Second Empire, l'enjeu d'utiliser des capitaux et une main-d'œuvre inutilisée laissée en quelque sorte à côté de la première révolution industrielle était un des enjeux majeurs du réaménagement de Paris, c'est-à-dire que cet enjeu hygiéniste a permis d'utiliser les capitaux inutilisés et la main-d'œuvre inutilisée de cette époque-là, qui était en grand nombre, pour être mobilisés dans l'aménagement urbain et le réaménagement des métropoles, des grandes villes françaises, dont Paris. Un autre cas d'hygiénisme urbain est évidemment les cités-jardins de Ward, qui ont été copiés, y compris au Japon, et c'est là où j'arrive aux métropoles asiatiques. Ici, vous avez la cité-jardin de Denenchofu à Tokyo. Alors, sur la gauche, vous pouvez voir effectivement vous pouvez voir effectivement qu'on a cet arc de cercle. Alors, ce n'est pas une cité-jardin complète, c'est une demi-cité-jardin adossée à une centralité ferroviaire. Et à droite, la photographie en noir et blanc, vous voyez cette cité-jardin de Denenchofu qui était expérée. Et puis, toujours cet hygiénisme qui rencontre des enjeux économiques a été rapidement densifié au fur et à mesure des transmissions qui ont, par le poids de la fiscalité du patrimoine transmis, conduit à subdiviser les lots et à construire sur des parcelles de plus en plus restreintes, ce qui a conduit à une perte de qualité des enjeux hygiénistes et à une diminution des espaces verts dans cette cité-jardin et à une densification du bâti. Alors, on fait un bond dans le temps, on retrouve ces enjeux de verdissement et ces enjeux hygiénistes et de contrôle de l'urbanisation de façon plus récente, dans les années 80-90, avec la Smart Growth aux États-Unis, qui visait à contrôler l'urbanisation et à lutter contre l'étalement urbain, ou plus récemment, la durabilité urbaine, avec cet exemple de Tianjin, c'est-à-dire en Chine, pas loin de Pékin, c'est-à-dire densification de l'habitat en collectif de plutôt moyen étage, avec verdissement des espaces communs, etc. Bon. Cet enjeu de la densification et du verdissement des espaces urbains ne sont pas forcément en opposition. Avec le cas de Tokyo, la ville mature, on peut voir qu'il y a une forme de complémentarité. Alors vous avez ville mature, c'est-à-dire une ville mature tant par sa population, beaucoup de personnes âgées et donc du coup vulnérables aux épidémies, qu'au niveau de la croissance des dynamiques d'urbanisation, c'est-à-dire que ce n'est plus une ville qui croît en quantité, mais c'est une ville qui va, on va dire, se développer en qualité, c'est-à-dire qu'on n'a plus tellement d'avancée du front d'urbanisation, on n'a plus tellement d'ouverture de nouvelles zones à l'urbanisation, mais on va essayer de reconstruire la ville sur la ville en faisant mieux que ce que l'on avait fait lorsque l'on était dans un urbanisme plus quantitatif. Et donc, reconstruire la ville sur la ville en faisant mieux, c'est-à-dire un urbanisme plus qualitatif, ça a été de densifier non pas la population, mais le bâti, en rasant cette multiplication de petites maisons collées les unes aux autres, qui étaient en plus extrêmement vulnérables à d'autres risques, comme par exemple les risques sismiques et les risques d'incendie. Donc, raser, reconstruire selon les canons en fait, de la durabilité en petits collectifs qui libèrent des emprises au sol qui sont ensuite réutilisées pour verdir cette ville au bâti densifié et compacifié. Et donc là, on a un exemple dans cette ville mature de Tokyo d'urbanisme densifié, compacifié, qui libère en même temps de la place pour pouvoir être verdi. Ce qui rencontre les enjeux de santé publique levés par Catharine juste dans sa présentation un peu avant. Alors cette ville également va se densifier parfois de façon spectaculaire. Alors ce n'est pas encore une fois la population qui va être densifiée, mais c'est le bâti, et ce bâti va être verticalisé dans les espaces centraux où le foncier est le plus cher, ce qui permet de libérer en pied de tour des espaces que l'on va allouer soit au verdissement, soit à des équipements collectifs, des équipements publics. Et l'opération est rendue rentable par le fait que l'opérateur peut vendre plus de surface de plancher en verticalisant, ce qui permet de dégager des fonds dans le verdissement du foncier en pied d'immeuble. Alors, du coup, Tokyo s'est verticalisé à une vitesse assez impressionnante. Ça, c'est le centre de Tokyo dans les années 70. Ça, c'est le centre de Tokyo dans les années 2010. Vous voyez que c'est le même espace, mais c'est un espace beaucoup plus dense, mais paradoxalement aussi beaucoup plus vert. Ce verdissement, néanmoins, d'une ville verticalisée et dense pose énormément d'enjeux. Ce sont des enjeux techniques et technologiques. Alors là, c'est plus Tokyo, c'est Singapour, qui est mon deuxième exemple, où verdir une ville verticale, ça a un surcoût, et puis ça pose des questions de technologie, et puis ça pose également des enjeux sociaux, en particulier des enjeux d'accessibilité à ces espaces, qui ne sont pas forcément, qui restent des espaces ouverts au public, des espaces publics voire ouverts au public, mais qui ne sont pas forcément des espaces de déambulation naturelle, qui ne sont pas des destinations de hasard et qui sont parfois assez difficiles d'accès. Et puis, bien sûr, cette verticalisation pose d'autres questions sur lesquelles je passerai rapidement. En particulier, les effets des îlots de chaleur urbains, ce qui fait qu'un urbanisme verticalisé non végétalisé est fortement émetteur de rayonnement et de chaleur. Alors, qu'en est-il dans un monde post-Covid, qui est un monde où les populations sont plus vulnérables, qui est un monde aussi où la végétalisation a parfois été faite dans les intérieurs de ces villes densifiées et verticalisées, et donc du coup pose des questions de diffusion de virus et de pathogènes. Le deuxième exemple sur lequel je voulais revenir, c'est l'exemple de la Smart City, présentée parfois comme une ville durable, et Marten avait montré l'année dernière qu'il n'en était rien, présentée parfois comme un nouvel hygiénisme, et vous avez donc dans ces plaquettes marketing de la Smart City, de la ville intelligente, cette idée qu'on est dans un urbanisme vert, on reconnaît un peu sur le visuel cette idée également des cités-jardins avec une forme de centralité entourée comme ça de champs, d'espaces verts et d'espaces producteurs d'énergie verte, etc. En vérité, la Smart City n'est pas du tout une ville durable et n'est pas non plus une ville, une cité-jardin, une ville verte. Ça dépend, c'est au cas par cas. La Smart City, la ville intelligente, c'est d'abord en fait la ville des capteurs. C'est-à-dire la ville de la collecte d'informations. Et je rappelle que intelligent, en anglais, c'est autant l'intelligence cognitive, cette personne est intelligence, que l'intelligence, c'est-à-dire la capacité à collecter des données telles que dans CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, qui n'est pas l'agence de l'intelligence, mais l'agence du renseignement. La Smart City, la ville intelligente, l'Intelligent City, c'est sur le même vocable que se fonde le modèle urbain. Ce qui fait que si jamais on a des smart cities, des villes intelligentes qui sont vertes, qui sont durables et qui ont un aménagement réversible, c'est que l'aménageur a pensé au-delà de la notion de base, c'est-à-dire au-delà du modèle initial de la smart city. En particulier ici, alors non, je suis revenu. En particulier ici à Fujisawa, vous êtes sur une ville où le mobilier a été présenté, enfin, a été pensé comme étant réversible, mais ça ne fait pas partie des fondamentaux de la Smart City. C'est-à-dire que ça a été un design qui est allé plus loin que le modèle de base et qui n'a rien à voir avec la captation de données sur laquelle se fonde la ville intelligente. Ici, c'est des aménagements que j'avais montré l'année dernière déjà sur la réversibilité du mobilier en cas de séismes et de catastrophes naturelles, avec, vous voyez, à gauche, des panneaux solaires sur les pergolas qui peuvent en outre être transformés en tentes pour accueillir des réfugiés si le bâti s'effondre. Ici, dans les espaces verts, ils ont mis des sorties pour des sanitaires et des douches temporaires. Et puis, jusqu'aux bancs qui peuvent être ensuite retournés, vous voyez l'image de droite, pour être transformés en ustensile de réchaud pour cuisiner période de post-catastrophe naturelle, si jamais les réseaux et les habitations, le bâti a été détruit. Néanmoins, cette réversibilité, ce n'est pas une caractéristique propre à la Smart City, c'est une caractéristique propre de projets qui vont au-delà. Et ce qui est intéressant de voir, je passe ici, c'est que la Smart City n'est pas du tout réversible en soi, c'est-à-dire qu'un capteur, c'est un capteur, il a une fonction et une seule, et il ne peut pas en bifurquer. Ça veut dire que sa capacité à être résilient est nulle, ou quasi nulle. Et la Smart City, du coup, n'est pas une ville résiliente. Ce n'est pas une ville qui va penser la pandémie. C'est-à-dire que qui va permettre de sortir ou de gérer une pandémie. Et quand on pense, par exemple, à cet imaginaire de la Smart City, en vérité, lorsque l'on est dans la crise de la Covid-19, on est plutôt sur une approche, dans un premier temps très bricolage, très analogique de la pandémie. À gauche, c'est Paris avec l'urbanisme tactique. En gros, on ouvre des voies à la circulation en vélo. C'est Singapour, et vous voyez qu'on a mis des bouts de scotch pour la distanciation sociale dans les restaurants. Et à droite, c'est l'Inde, qui met des tampons sur les mains des gens qui doivent rester en quarantaine. Et donc, on a dans un premier temps toutes ces smart cities qui en fait ne servent à rien dans la gestion de la pandémie parce que leurs capteurs ne sont pas prévus pour ça. Et il a donc du coup fallu revenir à l'analogique, à des solutions, on va dire, extrêmes, vieilles comme le monde, pour pouvoir gérer cette pandémie. Et y compris à Singapour, qui est pourtant la Smart Nation, l'essentiel des applications ont en fait été des formes numériques d'une approche très analogique de la distanciation sociale et de la distanciation physique, avec à gauche Safe Distance Park qui référence en fait en temps réel la fréquentation des parcs pour savoir si on peut y aller ou pas en fonction du nombre de gens à l'intérieur. Et pareil avec Space Out et les shopping malls à droite, c'est-à-dire c'est uniquement du comptage de gens. Et c'est dans ce premier temps, ça a été mis en place assez rapidement en avril-mai 2020, ce n'était pas du tout des outils pour suivre la pandémie, mais pour suivre la densité de fréquentation des infrastructures. de cette Smart City et de ces villes. Il a donc du coup fallu repenser complètement la Smart City et c'est à partir de là qu'a été popularisé un autre terme qui vient de Chine et du monde chinois, c'est-à-dire la Safe City, où on a dû mettre, pour la rendre plus agile, pour rendre la technologie plus agile, de nouvelles technologies, dont des capteurs adossés à de la robotique, et là c'est le cas de Singapour avec ses chiens qui mesuraient la température des gens, ces chiens robotiques, ou de l'intelligence artificielle qui permet de faire en sorte que la technologie soit un peu plus souple, un peu plus apprenante. Bon. Très rapidement, puisque je n'ai plus le temps, juste en 2 minutes, des éléments de discussion, 5 points clés sur ce que nous apprend le cas de Tokyo et le cas de Singapour, c'est qu'il faut se méfier des illusions de la pensée magique. L'urbanisme et la technologie sont finalement assez peu flexibles. Et ça veut dire qu'ils ne sont pas conçus pour s'adapter automatiquement sans la main de l'homme ou sans la main de la population, sans la main de l'humanité, à des événements tels que la pandémie. Il faut également faire attention aux liens déterministes, c'est-à-dire que densité ne signifie pas plus grande vulnérabilité aux épidémies. Tout dépend en fait de savoir comment a été pensée la densité en adéquation avec les espaces verts, comment a été pensé les espaces verts, la densité, avec la fréquentation des lieux, la possibilité ou non de la distanciation sociale, etc. Donc, il n'y a pas de déterminisme entre densité et vulnérabilité aux pandémies. La question du débat démocratique et de l'état d'exception se pose, évidemment, que ce soit dans les modèles d'aménagement, que ce soit également dans les politiques de lutte contre les pandémies. La question du coût est un arbitrage extrêmement compliqué entre le surcoût pour anticiper le risque pandémique, le coût sanitaire, le coût psychologique des confinements, le coût environnemental de la densification de ces villes qui sont censées être plus durables quand elles sont denses, mais qui ne le sont pas quand elles ne sont pas vertes. Et puis la question du devenir de la durabilité, sur laquelle j'aimerais conclure avec cette crainte, c'est-à-dire que cette pandémie de la Covid-19 ne conduisent à vouloir, dans les années prochaines, à dédensifier les centralités urbaines, c'est-à-dire à revenir à ce que l'on connaissait dans les années 80, avant la durabilité et le développement durable, à un urbanisme peu dense, où effectivement les interactions sociales ne sont pas forcément très intenses, quoique il faudrait encore voir si la faible densité ne conduit pas néanmoins à accentuer les interactions dans certains lieux de rencontre des populations. Mais ce que je veux dire, c'est que cet étalement urbain et cette faible densité recherchée après la pandémie et cette fuite des centralités urbaines ne remettraient-elles pas en cause 30 ans ou 20 ans d'efforts d'urbanisme durable et de densification des villes pour préserver les ressources environnantes? Voilà, je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Raphaël. That was extremely interesting to see those practical examples of how different cities around the world have adapted, if you will, to the changing global and local, regional cases and environments. I think now we have a few minutes left for question and answers. So normally attendees can ask questions through the Q&A box at the very bottom. So please feel free to type in your messages directly. Lida, I don't know if I can see the questions. Do I see them in the chat box? Oh, yes. Okay. I think we can start with, I think, Marten, that's a quite interesting question, actually. So in terms of how to link in the 3 different presentations in terms of scalability and replicability, do you want to maybe ask it so that we can start a discussion between the panelists?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I was just trying to think out loud precisely about this question of scale and how it relates to the question of democracy or participation or collaboration. In Catharine's presentation, she gave these examples of the co-creation workshops. We had our own little example of the Breukers project that is also quite small scale, scalable, but small scale in principle. And so in Raphaël's presentation, it was more about this larger scale urban strategic planning of zoning, of trying to figure out like where, how to organize these cities. So I was kind of wondering about, so there's maybe good examples of how to think about collaboration in these small kind of skill settings, but what about things like zoning? Are there any good examples that we know of how to do these more complex questions? I don't know if they're more complex, but they have a different type of complexity that I think city governments like to keep within the domain of expertise. So I don't know if any other panelists have some experience with that. Yeah, Catherine does. Awesome.
I've been involved in some very interesting discussions with people from Public Health Scotland and representatives from Scottish local authorities and government about post-COVID. And one of the concepts that they find useful is 20-minute neighbourhood. The idea that we should be able to walk or get easily via public transport within 20 minutes to the things we need daily in our lives. And in a COVID lockdown, many people have found that that's all they can access. So if you haven't got access to those, there's a problem. There are many interesting details about what you can do at a micro scale within a 20-minute neighbourhood to enhance usability by pedestrians, access to green space, places for children. But one of the interesting things at a more sort of planning scale that's come out of that is local authorities are starting to find this useful as a concept to restrict the house builders who want to build on the periphery of towns expensive houses, individual houses with lots of green space because they know there's a market for it, but which are by no means 20-minute communities at all. So they feel that if there's a policy change that really promotes the idea that all communities, even rich suburbs, should be 20-minute, then there's an argument for more locally densified neighbourhoods that will allow rich and poor to get access to the facilities they need within a local area of the larger city. So it's a way of controlling planning and development that is often led by capitalist approaches to mass house building and those kind of things. It's quite interesting.
Est-ce que je peux ajouter, oui, un petit mot sur cette question de l'urbanisme à 20 minutes. À Paris, ils pensent à un urbanisme à 15 minutes. Ce sont des choses qui réémergent après le Covid, après la Covid, et qui existaient déjà dans les années 90 avec l'urbanisme durable, c'est-à-dire ce retour à une ville dense où les fonctions sont multiples, où les services sont accessibles par la population, que ce soit à pied ou avec les modes doux comme le vélo ou ce genre de choses. Ce sont des choses auxquelles je crois et j'espère que la Covid ne va pas remettre en question ces éléments-là, mais justement va les renforcer, va remettre au centre du débat l'importance de cet urbanisme. Néanmoins, le point que je voulais aborder, c'est que 15 minutes, 20 minutes, c'est de l'espace-temps, mais cet espace-temps, il n'est pas homogène. En particulier, avec le vieillissement de la population, 20 minutes, 15 minutes de marche quand vous êtes une personne âgée avec des problèmes de déplacement n'est pas exactement la même chose que 20 minutes de marche lorsque vous êtes un jeune adolescent bien portant. Ce n'est pas uniquement une question de distance-temps, c'est aussi une question de mobilier urbain et d'accessibilité. Ça veut dire que vous pouvez avoir une supérette qui est à 2 minutes de chez vous. Si vous devez prendre un escalier avec, on va dire, une quarantaine de marches pour y accéder entre votre maison et la supérette qui est en contrebas, quand vous avez, on va dire, des problèmes de mobilité, elle est à l'autre bout du monde. Donc c'est vrai que c'est extrêmement complexe de pouvoir mélanger des considérations topographiques, d'équipement et démographiques avec cette notion d'espace en 20 minutes qui est déjà complexe en soi.
Yes, thank you. And maybe just to jump on your response, Raphaël, it was really interesting the example you gave about how cities like Tokyo and Singapore are verticalizing, I suppose, the built environment rather than based on existing building infrastructure rather than building new ones. How would that model work would it work? To what extent would it be replicable in cities like Paris, where we already have, you can't build anything above the Eiffel Tower, or I don't know, in other cities across the world? Would this be something, is it, like you said, very much dependent on geopolitical, demographic factors, or is this something that every city can essentially put into place? What would be really the key challenges? Every city is very different, and so it's not easy so much to put all these really good ideas and solutions into practice. And then to join with Catharine's presentation, we talk about how important green spaces are to human health and well-being. Is there ever and the challenge of convincing city planners and building developers of how important it is? Is it ever an issue to convince citizens themselves? Are they aware of how important it is, with all these other things that are happening every day? Do they recognize the importance of having that green space? And should it come from citizens bottom up rather than top down, I guess? So I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Peut-être sur l'urbanisme vertical, 2 points. Le premier point, c'est que ça dépend des politiques mises en place. C'est-à-dire qu'il y a des choses qui ne sont pas possibles de faire dans les régimes démocratiques et d'autres qui sont possibles en fonction des rapports de force et de la nature du régime politique en place. La deuxième chose, c'est que la verticalisation est une solution dans certains cas pour libérer de l'emprise au sol et faire autre chose avec, en particulier le verdir et à proposer d'autres services urbains. Mais en termes d'environnement, l'urbanisme vertical est beaucoup plus consommateur de ressources. Donc, du coup, il y a là un effet, on va dire, limitant. Et puis, en termes de pandémie, on ne peut pas penser à un urbanisme vertical sans l'ascenseur, pardon. Et l'ascenseur est par nature un cluster en soi de diffusion des germes. Et donc, du coup, la question est de savoir comment est-ce qu'on arbitre entre plus de foncier libéré au sol pour l'urbanisme vert et puis cet urbanisme vertical qui pose d'autres enjeux énergétiques, sanitaires, etc.
Can I add a comment on verticality? I do have concerns about verticality, high-rise, as being a solution to resilient cities. We know from studies of what the quality of the environment is at the base of very tall towers, and wind turbulence can make these very unpleasant places to actually spend time. So they may be technically green, but who would want to sit there or have their children play there? And if you're in the 22nd floor or the 45th floor and you've got lots of children, you're looking after the baby, the older child wants to go and play, you can't possibly supervise them 22 floors down. So there are many practical things that make high-rise living very difficult for many people if they also want access to healthy outdoor environments. People talk, there have been solutions that involve deck space, but they have restrictions on what you can grow and their safety elements. As soon as you've got anything that relies on continuous supply of electricity to access, that's vulnerable to power shortages and in any area that is vulnerable to earthquake or earth tremors, challenges there too. So I think if we're talking about resilient cities, I think in the short term, high-rise has been seen as a solution, but I would hope we can actually move beyond that because there are models of urban living that are dense, that have green space, but are not high-rise. And I think that's where we should be looking.
I don't know if we have any more time for questions. Is there something after this, or do we have a last few minutes, Lida? I think so.
Yeah, it's lunch break. You can talk if you don't worry.
Okay. I maybe had a question for Marten and Sylvia on your project, which I found very interesting. So if I understood correctly, you did the pilot or the framework methodology on 4 pilot cities in Europe. when you did the pilot studies, were there any significant differences that came about in terms of the key challenges or some of the main issues that the cities faced? Was it very different because of the heterogeneous nature of the cities, or were there a lot of common sort of challenges and priorities that were identified from the pilot work that you did for that project?
I'll try to answer that, digging back, because I was in Szeged and in Milan like 3.5 years ago, and my colleague Yvette, she did user research with colleagues from the project in Chankaya and Alcalá de Henares. What I'm just trying to see if these findings are interesting to tell now. Well, maybe. No, it's very much it's quite case specific. Well, first of all, what we found was that in Szeged, which is in the southern part of Hungary, I spoke to city planners, and we went into these parks that were going to be restructured in a way, and we tried to find out the diversity of users of those parks and what they need and what they would like to see. And what struck me was that on the one hand, within the city, there was not a great interest in very collaborative planning. They said, well, we don't have a practice of doing, of inviting all stakeholders early on in the process. So that's not working for us. So what we rather do is we make a few designs for these parks and we invite people to vote on it. And what I found remarkable in the talks with the planners was that they were very aware of the enormous variety of users, which was also varied in terms of season. Like in different seasons, you have different users that make use of these spaces more or less. And they, so they take into account these different users quite well, I thought. But for instance, this planning guide, the step-by-step guide that we developed, is not something that is going to be used by the planners in the city of Szeged. In Alcalá and in Chankaya, they are interested in using it. But so it depends very much on a local planning and political culture as well, the extent to which it's considered interesting. And one other thing that I found interesting to point out is that in Milan, there was a quarry, you know, where they have dug out stone, and there's a lot of quarries in the area of around Milan. And in one quarry, the owner, together with the mayor in a town of Paderno Dugnano, decided to both invest in the renaturing of this area. And they found one user group who was very interested in taking up the maintenance of this area. And these were the older men interested in fishing, because there was a pond in the middle. So these are now actually the caretakers of this park, which is widely used by many ages. It's also used for educational purposes, festivals. It's a safe park. It's really thanks to these fisher guys who are always hanging around with their cups of coffee. So they found they didn't follow any collaborative planning guidance, but they just sat together and they were very eager. And they were also, but they also had, the project developer was also willing to invest in renaturing of this area, because it was a family company and he felt responsibility for that. So that makes you think, what can we do to sort of invigorate this sense of responsibility in other developments? Because this is one example and it's very context specific, but the sort of collaborations that have that took shape there could be replicated elsewhere as well. But maybe then something has to change also in the sort of the institutional normative framework relating to project development and who's responsible for what. but I'm not sure that's an answer to your question.
No, it is. It's very interesting, absolutely, and I think it emphasizes kind of some of the key message in terms of the specific, the really local conditions and geopolitical factors that are very important when we talk about issues.
Can I add one more thing? Sorry. What we see what you see now in for instance my city in Amsterdam is a lot of local initiatives, and then the idea is that they should be happy because they are granted the opportunity by the municipality to do something with an unused small spot of land temporarily, and then they sometimes even have to pay rent for that. But it should be the other way around, of course, because they create quality for these small spots in the city, and maybe in a few years there's going to be developments there. But the way of thinking has to change there. And now you see in Amsterdam that a lot of these initiatives, which are temporary, but often after 5 years they're still there. And then you have school gardens and everything, and also contributions to biodiversity in the city. So actually these initiatives should be paid, I think, by the municipality, or at least the relationship in this collaboration should be reconsidered to acknowledge the value that these initiatives bring. And I think then that's a small scale, but if you look at all these initiatives, it becomes a network, and it also can become an ecological network in that sense, and a socio-ecological network.
Yes, thank you. And even in Paris, we have something called sort of similar to what you're talking about, where it's called the budget participatif, where local communities, every 2 years, I think there's a certain amount of budget that the city distributes to different communities, and the citizens in that neighborhood or arrondissement vote, or propose different projects that the money can be used, and they all have to meet certain criteria in terms of social, economic, and environmental sustainability. So it's a way to get citizens to really participate in that. Okay, we have €1 million, and you can build a new park or renovate an existing park, or but yeah, just one kind of practical example also of that. Okay, so apparently we have to stop now. But it was very, very interesting. Thank you so much, everybody, for contributing and for the attendees listening in. I don't know if anybody wants anything to add now, but
just wanted to say thank you. I love this idea of what we call urban acupuncture, these sort of small interjections that can be very creative. And thank you, Raphaël and Marten and Sylvia, as well as Marianne, for a great session. I've learnt a lot too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you all. It was very interesting indeed.
Yes.